On the morning of the 10th of February, 1906, a battleship slid down the ways at Portsmouth Dockyard and into the harbour waters with almost no ceremony. She had been laid down just over 4 months earlier, on the 2nd of October, 1905, and her construction had been driven at a pace that struck many observers as reckless. Naval attachés from a dozen countries watched and quietly noted that the Royal Navy appeared to be in some kind of hurry. What they could not yet appreciate was that the ship they were watching enter the water had already made their own navies obsolete. Every battleship then in commission, every battleship then under construction, every battleship that any navy on Earth had spent a decade and a treasury building, all of it, in a single morning, had been reduced to a second tier of warships for which the world had not yet found a name. That ship was HMS Dreadnought. Within months, the world had found the name. Within years, every major navy on Earth was locked in a race to build ships just like her. This is how one vessel unmade an era of naval power and started the most consequential warship arms race in modern history. To understand what Dreadnought represented, it is necessary to understand what she replaced. The pre-Dreadnought battleship had been the dominant instrument of sea power since the late 1880s, and by 1905 navies worldwide had converged on a broadly similar design. These were formidable ships, displacing between 12 and 15,000 tons, armored in case-hardened steel, and carrying a main battery of typically 4 heavy guns, almost universally 12-inch in caliber, mounted in 2 twin turrets fore and aft. Supporting that main battery was a secondary armament of 6-inch quick-firing guns, and in some later designs an intermediate battery of 9 or 10-inch weapons intended to reach out to longer ranges. The British Lord Nelson class, the last pre-dreadnoughts laid down by the Royal Navy, carried 10 9.2-inch guns as secondary armament in an attempt to address the problem of longer-range engagements. Dozens of ships of broadly this pattern had been built, by Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Japan, and the United States, representing collective expenditure that ran into hundreds of millions of pounds. On paper, any one of those pre-dreadnoughts was a proven weapon. Their designs had been refined over 2 decades. Their crews were trained. Their gunnery doctrines were established. The Royal Navy alone had invested in the majestic class and its successors a standard of battleship construction that other navies had simply copied, building ship after ship to an essentially common design throughout the 1890s. The last decisive clash of these fleets had been at the Battle of Tsushima on the 27th of May, 1905, where the Imperial Japanese Navy had destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet, itself a pre-dreadnought force, in a single afternoon's fighting. Those ships, the very best the world's navies could then field, were what Dreadnought rendered second-hand. On paper, every navy in the world had a battle fleet. After Portsmouth, on the 10th of February, 1906, every navy in the world had a collection of ships that would need a new and diminishing designation. The man responsible was Admiral Sir John Arbuthnot Fisher, known throughout the service as Jacky. Born in Ceylon on the 25th of January, 1841, Fisher had entered the Royal Navy on the 13th of July, 1854, at the age of 13, stepping aboard Nelson's former flagship Victory at Portsmouth for his initial entry. He had spent much of his career in gunnery and torpedo development, serving 4 tours of duty at Portsmouth across 25 years, and he had accumulated a precise understanding of where naval warfare was heading that most of his contemporaries simply lacked. Appointed First Sea Lord on the 20th of October, 1904, Fisher moved immediately and with characteristic force. He gathered an informal group of advisors around him in early 1904, before he had even formally taken office, to define the characteristics of the battleship he intended to build. By January 1905, he had formalized this group into a committee on designs, which he chaired himself as president, having personally appointed every member. The committee was nominally independent, but Fisher had already settled the 2 essential parameters before it convened. The new battleship would carry only 12-inch guns, and it would make no less than 21 knots. The intellectual foundations for this design had been accumulating for years. In 1903, the Italian naval architect Vittorio Cuniberti had published an article in Jane's Fighting Ships advocating what he called an ideal future British battleship: 17,000 tons, a dozen 12-inch guns in 8 turrets, 12 inches of belt armor, and a speed of 24 knots. The Italian Navy had declined to pursue his ideas, but the concept was now in wide circulation. More practically, the battles of the Russo-Japanese War had provided Fisher's committee with hard operational data. The Battle of the Yellow Sea in 1904 had produced an engagement at ranges reaching 14,000 yards, 13,000 meters, a distance at which no navy had previously fought a fleet action. At Tsushima, Captain William Pakenham, the Royal Navy observer aboard a Japanese warship, reported that 12-inch gunfire from both sides had demonstrated clear hitting power and accuracy, while 10-inch shells, when they struck, passed largely unnoticed. Fisher drew a direct operational lesson. At the ranges modern battles were now being fought, only the heaviest guns counted, and a ship that mixed calibers was a ship that confused its own gunnery. When a salvo landed, a fire control officer needed to know whether the splash came from a heavy gun or a lighter one. If both were firing simultaneously, he could not be sure. The answer was to carry a single, uniform heavy caliber and nothing else. The gunnery case for the all-big gun ship was reinforced by longer-range torpedoes. As torpedo range extended, battle lines would be forced to keep their distance, pushing engagements further out to ranges where medium-caliber weapons became progressively less effective. Percy Scott in Britain and William Sims in the United States were already driving expected battle ranges towards 6,000 yards, 5,500 meters, at which distance gunners had to wait for shells to arrive before correcting for the next salvo. Keeping range open negated the torpedo threat and simultaneously negated the faster-firing secondary battery. Fisher's conclusion was that the secondary armament of a conventional battleship was a weight penalty that brought nothing useful at the ranges where future battles would be decided. The propulsion question was equally consequential. The steam turbine had been invented by Charles Algernon Parsons in 1884, and Parsons had introduced it to the naval world in dramatically unauthorized fashion at the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Fleet Review at Spithead in 1897, when his yacht Turbinia had woven through the assembled warships at speeds of up to 34 knots, entirely beyond the reach of the picket boat sent to intercept her. Following successful trials of 2 turbine-powered destroyers, Viper and Cobra, and positive results from several small turbine-driven passenger vessels, Fisher's committee addressed the propulsion decision on the 18th of January, 1905, choosing turbines over conventional reciprocating triple-expansion steam engines specifically because turbines saved 1,100 long tons in total displacement. That was not merely an engineering preference, it was the decisive margin that allowed a heavier armament to be carried within an acceptable hull size. The hull itself required 7 iterations in the Admiralty's experimental ship tanker Gosport before the final form was selected. A team of 3 assistant constructors and 13 draftsmen then produced the detailed drawings. The internal hull structure was deliberately simplified and a limited range of standard plates, varying only in thickness, was adopted to accelerate construction. The committee had also resolved other critical questions before it disbanded on the 22nd of February, 1905, the number of propeller shafts, the size of the anti-torpedo boat armament, and the addition of longitudinal bulkheads to protect the magazines and shell rooms from underwater explosions, a lesson drawn directly from the survival of the Russian battleship Tsesarevich after a Japanese torpedo hit during the Russo-Japanese War. To accommodate those bulkheads without increasing displacement, the thickness of the waterline belt armor was reduced by 1 inch, 25 millimeters. Every decision was a calibrated trade. The ship that emerged from those decisions was significantly larger than anything the Royal Navy had previously built. Dreadnought measured 527 feet in overall length, with a beam of 82 feet 1 inch and a draft at deep load of 29 feet 7.5 inches. She displaced 18,120 long tons at normal load and 20,730 long tons at deep load, nearly 3,000 long tons more than the Lord Nelson-class ships then under construction alongside her. Her machinery was contracted to Vickers, Sons, and Maxim, who sourced the turbines from Parsons, as they had no large turbine experience of their own. The installation comprised 2 paired sets of direct-drive turbines, each driving 2 propellers of 8 feet 10 inches in diameter with 3 blades, powered by 18 Babcock and Wilcox boilers operating at a working pressure of 250 pounds per square inch. The turbines were rated at 23,000 shaft horsepower. On her sea trials on the 9th of October, 1906, she reached 21.6 knots from 27,018 shaft horsepower, exceeding her design speed by more than half a knot. She could carry 2,868 long tons of coal and an additional 1,120 long tons of fuel oil, the oil to be sprayed onto the coal to increase its burn rate. At 10 knots, her range was 6,620 nautical miles. Her main armament was 10 45 caliber breech-loading 12-inch Mark X guns, carried in 5 twin turrets. The forward turret, designated A, and 2 aft turrets, X and Y, sat on the center line. 2 wing turrets, P and Q, were position port and starboard of the forward superstructure. Between 60 degrees before the beam and 50 degrees abaft the beam, Dreadnought could bring 8 of her 10 guns to bear simultaneously, a broadside weight that no existing battleship could match, and which she could deliver while maintaining fleet speed. Each gun could depress to -3 degrees and elevate to +13.5 degrees. The 850-pound armor-piercing projectiles left the muzzle at 2,725 feet per second. Using standard 2CRH armor-piercing shells, maximum range was 16,450 yards, 15,040 meters. With the more aerodynamic 4CRH shells, that extended to 18,850 yards, 17,240 meters. Rate of fire was approximately 2 rounds per minute per gun, with 80 rounds carried per barrel. For fire control, Dreadnought was among the first Royal Navy vessels fitted with instruments for electrically transmitting range, order, and deflection information directly to the gun turrets, with control positions in the spotting top at the head of the foremast. For those who study the moments when a single ship changes the course of naval history, and there are not many such moments, if that story interests you, subscribing to this channel means you will not miss the next one. Secondary armament initially consisted of 27 50 caliber quick-firing 3-inch 12-pounder guns, firing 12.5-pound projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 2,660 feet per second at a rate of 20 rounds per minute, with 300 rounds per gun. These were primarily anti-torpedo boat weapons, not a second line of engagement against enemy capital ships. Dreadnought also carried 5 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes, 2 on each broadside and 1 in the stern, with 23 torpedoes embarked, plus 6 14-inch torpedoes for her steam picket boats. The anti-aircraft armament evolved considerably during the war years. In 1915, a pair of quick-firing 6-pounder Hotchkiss guns on high-angle mountings were added to the quarterdeck, capable of elevation to 60 degrees. These were replaced in 1916 by a pair of 3-inch 20 hundredweight guns on high-angle Mark II mounts, firing 12.5-pound shells at 2,517 feet per second at 29 rounds per minute, with a maximum effective ceiling of 23,500 feet. What the bare specifications cannot fully convey is the shock of the comparison. A pre-Dreadnought battleship carried for 12-inch guns and relied on its secondary battery to sustain weight of fire. Dreadnought could deliver a broadside of 8 12-inch guns. A pre-Dreadnought battleship made perhaps 18 knots. Dreadnought had just run her sea trials at 21.6. She was not only more powerful than any ship afloat, she was faster than them. A pre-Dreadnought squadron could neither close to fight her at advantage nor run to avoid her. The tactical geometry was simply broken. The strategic consequences followed immediately. The launch of Dreadnought set off a naval arms race of a kind that had not been seen before. Navies around the world, and the Imperial German Navy in particular, recognized almost at once that their existing battle fleets had been devalued. The German response was systematic and sustained, producing a series of Dreadnought classes that would eventually bring Britain and Germany to the edge of war over sheer tonnage. Fisher had intended his design to give Britain an unassailable lead, reasoning that Britain, with her industrial capacity and her existing naval infrastructure, could outbuild any competitor in the new class. The logic was not wrong. But the race was real. Japan had laid down Satsuma 5 months before Dreadnought's keel was laid, intending her as an all-big gun ship, but a shortage of 12-inch weapons meant she entered service with only 4 of the planned 12 such guns, a pre-Dreadnought in effect, regardless of intention. The Americans had begun design work on their all-big gun South Carolina class around the same time, in 1904, but progressed at a leisurely pace. The 2 ships were not ordered until March 1906, 5 months after Dreadnought had been laid down and the same month she was launched. By any measure, Britain had won the first round. What no one had yet fully reckoned with was that in winning it, Fisher had simultaneously handed every rival navy a template. The world now knew exactly what a modern battleship had to look like. Dreadnought's own operational record, measured in fleet actions, was almost entirely absent. She did not fight at Jutland in May 1916, having been in refit when the battle was joined, a singular irony for the ship whose name the battle's participants carried. She did not participate in any of the other major naval engagements of the First World War. In July 1916 she was relegated to coastal defense duties in the English Channel. She rejoined the Grand Fleet in 1918. The action for which she is uniquely recorded in the annals of naval history occurred on the 18th of March, 1915, in the waters north of Scotland, when she rammed and sank the German submarine SMU-29. She remains to this day the only battleship confirmed to have sunk a submarine. It is a distinction that carries a certain irony. The most consequential warship of her generation, the ship that redefined what a battleship was, is remembered operationally not for her 10-12-inch guns but for her bow. She was reduced to reserve in 1919, sold for breaking up 2 years later. The ship that had taken just over a year from keel to completion, that had reached 21.6 knots on trials and fired 8 12-inch guns in a single broadside, was gone by 1921. But the word was not. Every battleship built in her image carried her classification. Every battleship built before her carried a name that acknowledged her superiority. Pre-Dreadnought. The prefix alone tells you everything about what one ship, built in a hurry at Portsmouth and launched without ceremony on a February morning, had done to the entire previous generation of naval power. They were no longer simply battleships. They were the ones that came before. Thank you for watching. If you would like to be here for the next ship story, subscribing and turning on notifications ensures you will not miss it.